Hello and welcome to Star Wars Jedi Outpost. Today is Tuesday, March 15th, 2016, and this is episode 1 of our Star Wars show. I am Matt Arnold, editor-in-chief of FilmSchoolHooligans.com, and on this special first episode, I'm going to be talking about The Force Awakens. So before we get into talking about Star Wars The Force Awakens, I wanted to go back and address my initial reactions of when Disney actually bought out Lucasfilm and my thoughts on that. So I remember back in October of 2012 when Disney finally bought Lucasfilm for something like $4 million. I know a lot of people were excited about that, and I had a part of me that was also very excited, but I was also very concerned because I'm not a big fan of the prequel films. I enjoyed them when I was younger, but as I got older, you can start to see a lot of the issues with the films, and, they just never really resonated with me, especially as an adult. And, the acting was wooden, the stories were okay, but they seemed to divulge too much into a lot of the politics, and, a lot of those stories just came across as very bland and boring, and it took 3 films just to see Anakin Skywalker's transformation to becoming Darth Vader, and the final payout wasn't there. So, when I heard that Disney bought Lucasfilm, I was excited because we got more Star Wars films. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, but I also had a lot of reservations because of the prequel films. And one of the things that had a lot of hope for me was the fact that George Lucas was no longer going to be involved as a director for the future films. And I think a lot of people were really excited about that. I think it was the right thing to do for George Lucas to walk away from the Star Wars universe and to pass it on to new storytellers that had, new and bigger ideas, and, young guys who are just fans of the franchise. And I think for every party involved, it was the right decision to make. So, when Disney bought Lucasfilm, I was kind of conflicted until they started announcing their plans for Star Wars and what they were going to do with the franchise. So I think the biggest tipping point for me was when, they announced the plans for Star Wars, and when they announced that J.J. Abrams was going to be directing the film, and they said that the story would be a continuation after Return of the Jedi. And I think everyone involved, and I know all the fans, were extremely excited because people have been wondering over the last 30 years, like, what actually happened to Princess Leia? What happened to Luke Skywalker? And, what happened to Han Solo? So the fact that we were getting not only the original cast involved, but we would finally be seeing what happened to our beloved characters 30 years after the events of a film. And I think, a lot of people were very, very excited to see the continuation of the story rather than more prequel films. Myself included, I honestly, when I was a kid, Luke Skywalker was one of my favorite heroes. And the fact that we are going to see him 30 years later as, one of the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, I mean, that was really exciting. And I think, that prospect of that continuing story is what was going to be drawing back those old fans into the theaters who, like myself, were not a big fan of the prequels. So they were going to try and maintain, the older fans and please them while also bringing in a new generation of fans to this amazing franchise, and it worked really well. So I remember, after they announced the film, and once they announced that the original cast was coming back, and the film would be, a continuation of the story, but it would also be more like the original cast is passing on the baton to the new generation of heroes. That really excited me. I thought it was new and fresh. And when J.J. Abrams finally came on board, he originally said that he wanted to go back to shooting Star Wars on film because all the George Lucas prequels were not shot on film. They were all on digital. J.J. Abrams wanted to capture, the cinematic magic of those original films. So he announced he was going to be shooting the movie on film, and he also came out and said that they were going to be using practical effects, which is something that I think most people got the most excited about. If you've seen the prequel films, you know that almost every single set, every single creature, every single world, it's all digital, it's all fake, it's all CGI, and it just doesn't look real compared to the original films. The original films used all practical sets. They built ships, they built the creatures and puppets, and that's exactly what J.J. Abrams was going for this film. Sure, there was a lot of CGI involved, but there was a ton of practical effects. They actually built a bunch of X-Wings that were, scaled the size. They built a full-scale Millennium Falcon. They built all the sets. So when you actually saw the film, you felt like you were watching some of the original films, just it looked more modern and updated. And it was really, really interesting to see. And I remember J.J. Abrams, when he was on set, he released a promo talking about Star Wars, and they were talking about the organization Force for Change, and he had a bunch of weird alien creatures walking in the background, and that just perked everyone's ears up and their eyeballs went wide. It was really exciting to see that the production was going back to practical effects. So I think doing that is what really set this film apart from the prequel films, and it had a lot of people invested on the story, and they wanted to see where their favorite characters were going to go with this new era of technology. So after the film was shot and completed, the hype surrounding this film is unlike anything I have ever seen in my lifetime. I remember when Star Wars Episode I came out. I remember the hype for that. I was little at the time. I was about 10 or 11, and there was a lot of hype for that film. But I think the hype for The Force Awakens surpassed Episode 1 because of the fact that we were getting the original characters back, and that it would be a continuation of the story. And I never can remember hype being so big and so grand for any film ever in my lifetime. And when they had the Star Wars Celebration in the summertime, and they brought out all the droids and the cast, and they were talking about the film, and the fact that no one would talk about the story, and that even J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy, who runs Lucasfilm now, they did not want to divulge in any of the plot points, because they wanted people to go in and experience this film fresh and for the first time. And I think that was really smart. And so they were really smart about marketing this film and how much information was getting out there. And because no one knew what the plot was up until the week the film came out. There's a lot of speculation going around of what the film would entail. And, some people got things right and a lot of people got things wrong. But I think a lot of the hype was built from the fact that no one knew exactly where the story was going. We didn't know anything about any of the new characters. And we really had no idea what was going to be going on with the original characters. And so I think that really started to build the hype for this film. And, after Disney released, the first teaser for the film, and then they released the first trailer about 6 months later, and people saw those practical effects. They saw, their first glimpse of Chewbacca and Han Solo. The hype just skyrocketed. And, after Star Wars Celebration, and then they had, May the 4th, and, once Disney started releasing all their books and comic books, people's mindsets were all about Star Wars, and, they just could not wait to get their hands on this film. They had the last and final trailer, I believe it was October. It was during one of the big football games, and they released the final trailer for the film, and it had people all over the world breathless, and myself included. I was in tears because this is the film that we've all been waiting for 30 something years, and the fact that J.J. Abrams promised the fans that they would get it right, and just from seeing the footage and seeing the new characters and some of the original ones, it was a very emotional moment for Star Wars fans, and myself included. And, all of the fan community was just so happy and excited. We knew that J.J. Abrams wouldn't let us down. And, after that night, the pre-sale tickets went on sale. And that was the night that, people say broke the internet. Everyone pre-ordered their tickets. I pre-ordered our tickets, and a lot of people weren't able to get tickets because all the online movie sites and Movie Phone and Fandango, all these sites just went completely down. They all crashed because people all over the world were trying to buy their movie tickets for this film, and it was just a really nice treat for all the fans. It was the ultimate Christmas present. Star Wars was released December 17th, a week before, basically, I think it was a week before Christmas. And it was just the perfect Christmas gift that anyone could have ever received, especially for a Star Wars fan. So the hype was just mind-blowing. And then, the fact that the film shattered pretty much every record in cinema history, which we'll get to in a little while. But the fact that happened is just also mind-blowing. But I think that also goes hand in hand with, the hype for the film. And it just shows, the success of this new franchise and where it's going to be going because of the fan community. So let's actually go into Star Wars Episode 7. And I'm going to talk to you guys about basically my thoughts on the film. I'm going to go over my pros, the cons, and kind of just where I think the story's heading. And we'll get into some Episode 8 speculation in a little while. But let me give you my actual impression of the film before we go into the pros and cons. So let me start off by saying that I absolutely loved Episode 7. It was everything that I hoped it would be, and it was everything that I wanted it to be. It hit all the right notes. The nostalgia was there. It was actually really funny. I think it was one of the funniest of all the Star Wars films. It had a lot of humor, a lot of heart. It really resonated with me. It had a really good villain. I loved Daisy Ridley as Rey. I thought the heroes were well set up, especially the new heroes that we're getting. They were set up so well. I loved how the original cast members blended with the new cast members. I thought that was done really well. The movie it hit every note that I wanted it to, and then some. I thought it was a great action-adventure spectacle. The science fiction was flawless. The special effects were, top-notch. I loved the blend of CGI and practical. The lightsaber fight, all the different fights were actually done really well. And the thing that really made this movie work for me was the fact that they had a lot of the classic Star Wars themes. They had a lot of what we've seen before, but they also gave us things that we haven't seen before. And I'll get into that, when we talk about the pros. But my first initial impression of the film was I was so happy with it, and I ended up seeing it, I think, 5 times in the theater. I liked it that much. And just being in the theater with all the fans, that night that we saw the film, we saw it opening night, and it was so much fun, and it was one of the best cinematic moments that I can ever remember. And it was just truly a wondrous sight of just magical storytelling. It was brilliant, and I thought J.J. Abrams really knocked it out of the park. And a lot of people were complaining, oh, it's just a setup film. It is and it isn't. I think it does set up Episode 8 perfectly, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But it was a bit of a setup, and but I thought it was a setup that was done perfectly. I really do. And as a movie on its own, I think it hit every note that all the true hardcore Star Wars fans wanted to see. And this was a film that, wasn't as divisive as, let's say The Phantom Menace. There were definitely people out there that didn't like The Force Awakens, and I totally get that. And we'll go into that with the negatives, but I think for the most part, most of the fans, I would say about 90 to 95% of the fans, all said this was the film they've been waiting for. I haven't checked the Rotten Tomato score for the film in a while, but the last time I checked, it was at like a 92 or 93. And that's from the audience and the critical rating. So, this film, I think it did its job, and it, really helped wash out the bad taste that we all had from the prequel films. And, as a film, it was not a perfect film, but it was everything I wanted it to be. And for that, I really applaud J.J. Abrams, Kathleen Kennedy, and just all the creators that helped bring this story to life. I think they really knocked it out of the park here. So getting right into the pros, the biggest thing that stood out to me that was a pro was all the actors. John Boyega, who played Finn, was exceptional. He truly was good. He was hilarious. His acting was really, really good. He got along really well with all the other characters. The chemistry between him and Rey was unlike anything I've seen in a film before. I mean, the chemistry with him, and then with Han Solo, and then BB-8, and then Poe Dameron it was so good, and he was kind of like our guide into this new Star Wars world, and he really brought a lot of comedy into this film that there's been comedy in Star Wars, especially, the original films with Han Solo. He was kind of always the comic relief for the foil, but John Boyega really brought a lot of humor to his role into the film, which is something that I think a lot of people weren't expecting. And Oscar Isaac was also really swell playing Poe Dameron, and his relationship with Finn was just really fun. It reminded me of the relationship between Han Solo and Luke Skywalker from A New Hope. They got along really well. It was fun. It was adventurous, and they both really did a phenomenal job bringing their new characters to life. And I can't wait to see where Finn goes with this story. I would love to see him become more rounded, and I'm really excited to see where the story creators take him, and I really can't wait to see his journey within the next couple films. So Harrison Ford was back playing an older Han Solo, and he was also just really good. He played the swashbuckler. He was the space pirate. So he basically just stepped right back into that role and really embodied Han Solo, but he played a more older and wiser Han Solo. So it was something that we haven't really seen before from Han Solo, but he was still the wisecracking, scruffy-looking nerve herder that we all know from the original films. And, the chemistry between him and Chewbacca was, just as good as it had ever been before. The biggest standout, though, that I thought from The Force Awakens was Rey and Kylo Ren. I'm going to start with Rey first. Rey, to me, was one of the most surprising characters of this new Star Wars film, and what made her such an inspiring character was the fact that she is a girl, and she's a girl hero. And you know, I always loved in films when writers and directors decide to create a hero that is not a man, because you know, we've seen that archetype for the last, I don't know, 50 or 60 years, and it's starting to get a little old. You know, the first time we saw a female heroine was back when Ridley Scott did Alien. And the character of Ellen Ripley is arguably one of the greatest female heroines of all time. And I've always been drawn to strong female characters in films, and Rey is the absolute definition of a strong female character. She truly was the biggest standout for myself in The Force Awakens. And I was actually a little nervous because there were reports going around a couple months before the film got released of her acting. And people had been saying that her acting was very wooden and stale. And Peter Mayhew, who played Chewbacca, had come out and said, yeah, her acting, you know, wasn't very good. And then there was an interview that came out a couple months later, and J.J. Abrams was talking with Daisy Ridley, who plays Rey. And Daisy Ridley said that on the first day of shooting, J.J. Abrams approached Daisy Ridley and said, hey, you know, your acting is very wooden and stale. And that actually had me really nervous, and I think it had a lot of other people really nervous, because, you know, the last time we had a lead character with wooden and stale acting was when we had Hayden Christensen, who, you know, played Anakin Skywalker in the prequels, and look how those films turned out. They were, you know, absolute garbage. So that had me a little worried. But the difference between J.J. Abrams and George Lucas is the fact that George Lucas is not an actor's director, meaning he doesn't work closely with actors, and he doesn't give them tips on how to improve acting and what he's looking for. And J.J. Abrams is completely the opposite. J.J. Abrams is an actor's director. And I think one of the benefits of having J.J. Abrams working on the film is he noticed right away that Daisy Ridley's acting might have been not what he was hoping for. So he told her right away, hey, your acting is stale and wooden, can you try and fix it? And he worked with her on getting, you know, her acting the way that he was hoping it would be. And I think because he told her that, it really worked. And honestly, so that was one of the biggest fears I had going into the Star Wars The Force Awakens. But once you see the film, you know, I didn't notice anything horrible about her acting at all. In fact, I thought her acting surpassed even John Boyega, who I thought was phenomenal. Daisy Ridley was the best part about Star Wars The Force Awakens. She truly, the acting was good, her character, there's a lot of mystery surrounding her character. You know, the chemistry between her and Han Solo and Finn and Poe and BB-8. I mean, she truly was a marvel in this film, and she really is an inspiration to women and young girls all around the world. You know, now we have a female heroine in the Star Wars universe that is actually doing something that most men do. You know, we've always had Princess Leia, of course, but the difference between Leia and Rey is there was only one Leia, and now we have another female character in the universe. Now we have Leia and Rey. And I think, you know, as the films go on, we're going to see a lot more female-centric roles in the universe. And I think that's absolutely great. I think it's needed. It brings a lot of diversity. And I actually am truly excited to see where Rey's story goes. We're going to get into speculation in a little bit. But Rey was really one of the best parts, if not the best part, about Star Wars The Force Awakens. And the fact that she could become a Jedi just like Luke Skywalker is something that really we haven't seen it before. There's been female Jedis in Star Wars. There were some female Jedis in the prequels, but no one knew who those characters were. They didn't really have names. There's Ahsoka from Star Wars: The Clone Wars TV show and Star Wars Rebels, but as far as the feature films go, Leia, technically she's not a Jedi because she's never trained, but now we have Rey, who is going to be training to becoming a Jedi, and I think it's just great that we now have a female who we can really root for, and a female who can be just as badass as, let's say, someone like Luke Skywalker. So Rey definitely was the greatest part about Star Wars. And on the other side of that, the other best part about The Force Awakens was Kylo Ren, who was played by Adam Driver. Now, what really concerned me with Kylo Ren is the fact that, we've seen villains in the Star Wars universe before, and they just come and go. The last time we had a truly great Star Wars villain was in Episode 1, when we had Darth Maul, but they unfortunately killed his character off, and it was completely premature, and Lucasfilm knew that, and so they tried to retcon that by bringing Darth Maul back to life in the Clone Wars TV show, and now he's supposedly going to be back in Star Wars Rebels, and there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of years of doing an Obi-Wan Kenobi spin-off movie and having Darth Maul be the main antagonist. So, when they had Kylo Ren come in to play the new Star Wars villain, I was keeping my fingers crossed that they didn't create another really great villain and just kill him off in the first film. And luckily, they actually didn't go that route at all. And what they did with Kylo Ren's character was something that I don't think anyone knew was going to happen in this film. As much as I loved Rey in The Force Awakens, and as much as it's really her story, it's also Kylo Ren's story. And I think that most of the character development with Kylo Ren is what The Force Awakens is truly all about, as with it is Daisy Ridley. And Adam Driver, the young man who played Kylo Ren, did such an amazing job. And if you've seen the trailers, or even if you've seen the film, you know that Kylo Ren he's not a Sith, but he is sort of a Jedi hunter. He is looking for Luke Skywalker, and as far as we know, he wants to track him down and kill him. Kylo Ren also is basically a Darth Vader fanboy. He collects relics. He has Darth Vader's helmet on a pedestal, and he talks to it. Kind of very Shakespearean, which Star Wars has always been very Shakespearean. And then Kylo Ren is also searching for Luke's and Anakin's blue lightsaber, and he's tracking that down. But the whole dynamic with Kylo Ren is something that truly was really, really fascinating. We were introduced to a weird alien humanoid kind of creature named Supreme Leader Snoke. And, the relationship between Kylo Ren and Snoke echoes the relationship between Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader. So it was really cool to see the kind of mentor and apprentice kind of relationship. But what really made Kylo Ren stand out the most is the fact that he is a Darth Vader fanboy, and the fact that we find out that Kylo Ren is actually the son of Han Solo and Princess Leia, and that from a young age, Kylo Ren had been conflicted, much like Anakin Skywalker had been conflicted. And unfortunately, Ben Solo, that was his name before he became one of the Knights of Ren, but Ben Solo was tempted to the dark side by Snoke. And we don't really know anything about why he was tempted or how he was tempted, but we know for sure that Snoke was the one that tempted Kylo Ren to the dark side. But what's interesting is we see the good and the light within Kylo Ren. There's that scene on the bridge, kind of towards the end of the film, where Harrison Ford confronts Kylo Ren and basically tries to bring him back to the light side. He tries to bring him back home, and there's that special shot of where the light is shining on Kylo Ren's face, and we see half of his face is lit up in the light, and then the other half is completely dark. And I thought that visual struggle was something really, really unique. And Kylo Ren truly is a really phenomenal character to watch. He made for a great villain, but he also wasn't cliched. He could have been very cliched like Darth Vader and been kind of like almost like zombie-like. We don't really know anything about him. He's just a cliched villain, but he had so much depth, and he was such a well-rounded character. And the fact that, there's a scene where one of the First Order officers gives him bad news, and instead of like just force choking him or doing something that Darth Vader would do or killing him, instead Kylo Ren goes on this like weird temper tantrum where he ignites his lightsaber and he's swinging it through the doors, and he's acting like a whiny little child. And I thought those little characteristics of him as a character just made him feel more human than any of the villains that we've ever seen before. And so Kylo Ren really was the other side of that coin to Rey. It was really both of their stories. Rey indeed was the Force that awoken, and Kylo Ren was the one that was trying to, get rid of the light side in him and completely go dark. So actually, I'm really curious to see where they take his character. And, that fight scene between him and Rey at the end of the film was brutal, it was beautiful, and I think it set up a future confrontation between those two characters that I think is going to be absolutely epic to watch. And, both Rey and Kylo Ren, we don't know if they're related. I personally think they're cousins, and we'll get more into that in a little bit with speculation, but you definitely can count your chips on Rey and Kylo Ren having another meeting, another confrontation, another lightsaber battle, and it's going to be something of epic proportions when we finally see, Sith and Jedi, or, I don't know if he's going to become a Sith or not, but he's definitely now in the dark side, so we're definitely going to see another fight between him and Rey, and I think I really know how it's going to play out. But it's really exciting to see, and Kylo Ren truly was the biggest standout alongside Rey for The Force Awakens. So as much as I loved Star Wars The Force Awakens, I did have a couple problems with the film that I'm going to go into right now. The first one I want to touch on is the whole storyline of the Starkiller base. Now, this is a common issue that most people had with the film. Now, Starkiller Base was, supposed to be the exact same thing as a Death Star, only the base is 100 times bigger than the Death Star, and the death toll of what Starkiller Base could do was also more greater than the Death Star. The Death Star was considered a super weapon that was able to basically blow up a planet and destroy it. And Starkiller Base is the same thing, but it's bigger, and it has the ability to wipe out, many planets at once rather than just one. So the threat of Starkiller Base was actually something that I think could have been really, really cool. The problem was it just wasn't executed well. We don't get a lot of development on how, where Starkiller Base is. We know it's kind of by the Hosnian system, but it's a planet that they might have mentioned it in one of the books or something, but I've seen the film a bunch of times. I can't even tell you where the hell Starkiller Base is. I know it's on a snowy planet, and we know what it can do because we see it destroy a bunch of planets, one of them being the Hosnian Prime system, which is where the New Republic is sitting currently. But there wasn't really much of an imminent threat with Starkiller Base at all in the film because we're getting introduced to all these characters, and more of the film is the struggle and relationships between the heroes and the villains. So when they threw in this whole Starkiller Base thing, it just didn't work for me. And I know it didn't work for a lot of people. And I didn't feel the threat of that, of the base. We saw what it can do, and I thought it was really cool, but it wasn't fleshed out enough for the film. And I think that was actually one of the more weaker parts of the film. They could have done something completely different. They could have just had not even a base at all. They could have just had the struggle between the heroes and villains, and that would have been just as good. But I think what they were going for is again, Lucasfilm is trying to not only win back the original fans, but I think they're also trying to deliver Star Wars to a completely new generation of fans. So they were kind of retreading what the original Star Wars film did with the Death Star, and I appreciate that, but they needed more development with Starkiller Base, and they didn't get me to care enough about the base and what it could do. I thought it was cool, but it was something we've seen before, and so for me, it just didn't really do anything for me. The second thing I didn't like was the whole sequence between Han Solo and the Rathtars. Now, when Rey and Finn and BB-8 first meet Han Solo, they wind up on his freighter, and he's kind of caught in the middle between these two, gangs of people. And Han Solo is hauling around these Rathtar creatures. He's smuggling them. And the sequence, I didn't think it was a bad sequence. I thought it was kind of fun and goofy. But what I didn't like about it, it seemed a little out of place in the film. And the actual look of the Rathars that was the one thing where they used CGI that looked really fake. The Rathars looked way too childish. They looked very cartoony. And it reminded me of some of the CGI that we saw in the prequel films. And so the scene, even though I didn't really mind the scene that much, they could have at least designed better looking Rathars or aliens or whatever the hell those creatures were. Or they could have just scrapped that whole idea together and just had a more somber reunion between Han Solo and Rey rather than, that whole action scene, which, I don't know. I the more I see it, the more it doesn't bother me, but what does bother me is the way they look. They don't look good, and it was very distracting for the film, and they could have, I think they could have made that whole sequence really a lot better, to be honest. And then the last thing that really bothered me about the movie was Han Solo's death. Now, this I've come to accept, and it doesn't bother me as much, but I will say that, the confrontation between Kylo Ren and Han Solo was really something that could have been really special. And I thought the way they handled the scene was totally fine. I loved, how Ben Solo, or Kylo Ren, whatever you want to call him, I loved the fact that he killed his father. That just makes the story more dramatic, more epic, makes it more Shakespearean. The problem is, there was no setup to that scene. So by the time Han Solo dies, there's really, you don't feel any emotion towards that. You feel anger at Kylo Ren. But what they should have done is they should have set up a scene prior to that moment in the film where Kylo Ren meets Han Solo and talks to him for a bit, or some sort of better setup to that scene, because by the time it happens, the emotional payoff just wasn't there. There was a scene I did hear a couple days ago. I heard that there is a scene, a deleted scene, that's going to be on the Blu-ray, where it shows Kylo Ren walking onto the Millennium Falcon, and he starts talking to himself about Han Solo, and he starts reminiscing about his relationship with Han Solo. And I think even if they had that one scene in there, that would have made the payoff to Han Solo's death more powerful. And I thought that his death was, in a way, powerful, but there just was no setup for it. It just kind of happened, and it felt a little out of place. And I think the creators know that they kind of botched that scene a bit. So I think when Episode 8 comes out, I think we're going to see either more flashbacks between him and Kylo Ren, or they're going to do something to kind of make up for the way they kind of botched Han Solo's death. I don't know if they're going to do some sort of funeral service for Han Solo, or they're going to recognize him, within the New Republic. I don't know what they're going to do. I think they have to, because a lot of fans were disappointed. I think we all knew Han Solo's demise was coming, and I have no problem with his demise. The problem was there wasn't an emotional payoff. And we see Leia, we see her reaction. She feels it in the Force, and then Chewbacca has this death scream that he lets out that was really emotional. But that was basically it. We don't really see anything else that shows that that truly emotional moment with Han Solo's death. So I think that whole sequence could have been set up better, but it is what it is, and it didn't break the film for me. But I was hoping it would have had more of an impact on the characters and the story in general. That was really the only issues I had with the film. I did think that Domhnall Gleeson, who played General Hux, I thought his acting was a little bit over the top. It kind of reminded me too much of a almost like a cartoonish version of Hitler. He kind of reminded me of the Hitler that we saw in Inglourious Bastards. He was kind of cartoony. He screamed a lot. It was over the top. But I kind of know what they were going for, so they didn't take me out of the film too much. And I did like what they did with Snoke. The problem was I didn't think he looked very good, but when they reveal that he's actually a hologram, that kind of laid all my concerns to rest, and hopefully he looks better in the future films, because he is a motion capture character done really well by Andy Serkis. So I hope we get a lot more Snoke in the future films. People complained about how his character bothered them and he looked kind of bad, but I said, well, you can't judge it too harshly, because it is just a hologram vision of Snoke. He might look more realistic when we see him in person in Episode 8, but and a lot of people complain that he wasn't really well developed, and there's a lot of theories going around with who he actually is as a character, which we'll get into. But overall, the Snoke thing didn't bother me like it did most people. I just think when we finally get more of Snoke in Episode 8, I think it's going to pay off really well. At least I hope it does. But those are the negatives. Not too much to complain about for The Force Awakens. It's not a perfect film, but it did everything I wanted it to. It was great nostalgia. It was exciting. It was fun. It was a truly new adventure story, and I can't wait to see where the story goes in the future films. So moving on, now let's talk about speculation and where Star Wars Episode 8 is going to go. The biggest one basically is concerning itself with Rey. We find out in The Force Awakens that Rey is Force sensitive. She's able to use the Force and she can control it. And there's that really cool lightsaber fight at the end of the film. And it had a lot of people speculating, who is Rey? Because by the end of the film, we still don't know who Rey is as a character. We know that she's been trained at some point in her life. We know she is very powerful with the Force. A lot of people, about a year ago, were speculating that Rey and Kylo Ren were siblings. That they are siblings. That they are related in some way. I was on that bandwagon. I truly believe that Rey was the long-lost daughter of Han and Leia, and that Kylo Ren was her twin brother. However, after seeing the movie, my personal opinion has changed slightly. I personally think that Rey is actually the daughter of Luke Skywalker. And I'll tell you why. When Rey goes and visits Maz Kanata in her castle, there's that whole sequence where Rey finds Luke's old lightsaber in that, trunk. And Rey touches it and she has this Force vision where she sees events of the past. She gets a flash into, a mysterious person who dropped her off on Jakku. And we also hear faintly the voice of Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi as they say, Rey, these are your first steps. And, we know that from Maz Kanata, what she says to Rey, she says, the lightsaber, the Force, it calls to you. And it wouldn't make sense, for me anyway, to have the Force call to Rey and have the lightsaber especially call to Rey if she was not a Skywalker. There's a lot of people out there that don't think she is a Skywalker at all and she's just a new character. And if it came down to that, I wouldn't really be disappointed with that. The problem is, why would the lightsaber call to Rey? Why would it? If she is not a Skywalker. Remember, in all the Star Wars films, that lightsaber has passed down generation to generation. It passed down from Anakin to Luke, and Luke lost it, and now I think it would make sense for that lightsaber to pass down from Luke to Rey. And then there's other little tidbits throughout the film why she would be a Skywalker. I still think she is a Skywalker. I don't think they're going to let that drag on till Episode 9. I think they're going to answer it in Episode 8. I would not be surprised one bit if she is not Luke's daughter. But I would be pretty surprised if she wasn't, and she's just a new character. Then I think that would be even more fascinating. And they'd have to, obviously explain why the lightsaber chose her and, why she's all of a sudden really powerful in the Force. But I think they're going to touch on a lot of that in Episode 8. I really loved, at the end of Episode 7, I thought it was such a brilliant move to introduce Luke at the very end of the film. Some people had issues with that. I thought it was the perfect setup to Episode 8. It kind of ends on a cliffhanger. And another reason why I do think Luke is Rey's father is the fact that when Luke sees her, when she climbs up those Jedi steps to the temple, Luke turns around and he has a look on his face like he knows her. And that look is a look not of happiness, it's a look of sadness. Like he feels regret for something he did a long time ago. And, some people I talked to said, well, Luke didn't even know who she was. And I think that's all bullshit. Luke knew exactly who she was. And when she, reached into her pack and extended her arm out to give him back his old lightsaber, you can see that look in his eyes. And that is the look of someone who is damaged. He feels sadness. And, you can bet your ass that there is a relationship between Luke and Rey. Now, we don't know quite exactly what the relationship is, but, I want to say I'm 95% certain that he is her father. And I think they're going to explore that in Episode 8 and Episode 9. And, you know, it's for certain Rey is going to be training as a Jedi. That, you know, is a foregone conclusion. And from what I've heard about Episode 8 so far, is it looks like Rey and Luke are going to be leaving that planet, that green planet that, you know, Luke has been hibernating on. And they're going to go on and have a series of adventures on their own. And they're going to, you know, Rey's going to be training with Luke. I think Episode 8, I think, is going to be very much like Empire Strikes Back. It's going to be dark. It's going to be gritty. You're going to see Luke's role be the mentor. He's going to be kind of like a Yoda figure, like an Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of figure. And I think that, you know, the way that The Force Awakens was set up, you know, Kylo Ren got his ass handed to him in that lightsaber fight. He is scarred and damaged. And I think that Rey, when she finally meets Kylo Ren in Episode 8, now whether he's a Sith or not, you know, that's the other thing too. Kylo Ren is also going to be training with Snoke. Or maybe another Sith altogether, we don't know. But I think it's going to be cool to see Rey training with Luke and Kylo Ren training with Snoke, or, you know, whether it's going to be Benicio del Toro's character. We don't know who he's playing yet. But you're going to see both of these Jedi training with their masters, and I think you're going to see a really epic battle between Rey and Kylo Ren in this new film. And I think Rey is going to get her ass handed to her this time, because that's kind of the whole point of a hero. Is if you look into the hero's journey, you know, there's always the lowest point for the hero before they can rise and become the hero that we all know and love. You know, for Luke, it was in Empire Strikes Back when Darth Vader reveals to Luke that he is his father, and Luke gets his hand cut off and he's left for dead. You know, that is Luke's lowest point in his journey. And Rey, you know, the biggest criticism with Rey is people have said she's a Mary Sue character, that she's unstoppable and she has no flaws. Well, I think you're going to see a lot of those flaws in this film, and I think Rey is going to have some sort of point in Episode 7 where she basically has a big failure, and she either in a battle or she fails a mission, or something bad is going to happen to Rey, and I think we're going to see that. Now, some people have also speculated that they think Rey there might be a possibility that Rey eventually will turn to the dark side. That would be, I think, a fascinating way to tell her story, and that maybe Kylo Ren could eventually turn back to the good side. The problem that I have with that theory, and I love the theory and I would embrace that, the problem with that, though, is I don't think Disney would do that, because they're setting up this hero that young kids are going to be looking up to, and then to turn that character or that hero on its head and now all of a sudden be a bad person, I don't think that's the type of message that Disney wants to send their younger viewers. Now, for adults, you know, that doesn't matter, because we're all mature and we understand the difference between right and wrong. The problem is kids don't, unless they're told. So, I don't know. I just can't see them going that route of making Rey all of a sudden a dark character. I think we're going to see a lot of darkness in Rey. I think she's going to be angry because of what happened to Han Solo, and I think she's definitely going to be tempted, and I think she's going to struggle with the dark side in her. But I just can't see them, Lucasfilm and all the writers, actually taking her character and making her become a villain. I just can't see that happening. If they did, I wouldn't complain, and I think it would be above and beyond brilliant. I just don't see it happening at this point. I also think that in Episode 8, we're going to see a lot of more political situations that we never really saw in The Force Awakens. You know, we still have no idea where the government is at. Like, what is going on within the New Republic? You know, we see General Leia leading this ragtag group of resistance fighters against the First Order, but that's really all we have heard about where the government is. I think in episode 8 we're going to explore a lot more of the political side of where the New Republic is, what's going on. We're going to see a lot of the leaders. We're going to see Leia as she works with those leaders. And I think some of that stuff could be really fascinating. I hope they don't go too political, because then, you know, if you get more into the political stuff, you can kind of tread back to going the route that the prequels went, which I don't think was a very good route at all. But I think you're definitely going to see more of the New Republic and the state of the New Republic and the leaders, which I think could be really fascinating. And I think you're going to see a lot more of Leia in the film, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see a situation or a scene where Leia shares a scene with Luke Skywalker. I think that's going to happen. I also think and hope that Lando Calrissian will be in the film. You know, it's been long rumored that he was going to be in one of these new Star Wars films. I would not be surprised if he fits right in with Episode 8, and we see him, you know, coming off right off the heels of Han Solo's death. That would be really fascinating. And I also hope that we see a lot more of the dark side in Episode 8. You know, Rian Johnson, who's the new director for Episode 8, you know, he is known for making really dark films. He directed that film with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis called Looper, and that was a very dark film. He also directed some of the, you know, darkest episodes of Breaking Bad. So I think Lucasfilm knew that they wanted this new film, Episode 8, to be a much darker, grittier version, kind of like The Empire Strikes Back was. And I think they got Rian Johnson and asked him to be the director because they know he will deliver something truly dark. And I think this film is going to be a complete echo of what The Empire Strikes Back was. I think there's going to be some twists and turns. There's going to be some bombs that drop. There's going to be reveals that no one has been expecting. There's going to be a bunch of, you know, WTF moments. I think, you know, me personally, if I was one of the writers, I think Luke is going to die in Episode 8. I at first, you know, years ago, I was speculating that he was going to die in Episode 7, and that he would right away become a Force ghost like Obi-Wan Kenobi was. But now I'm not certain on that. I think Luke has a chance of dying at the end of Episode 8, or he's going to die in Episode 9. I mean, we know his death is coming, and I wouldn't be surprised if he did die in 8, because I think he's going to become a mentor and Force ghost figure like Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi. But we'll just have to see where that goes. And I really do hope that Luke Skywalker has some sort of confrontation with Supreme Leader Snoke. You know, that's the other big thing that I hope we see in Episode 8. I want to see Luke being the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy, you know, because, you know, all the characters in Episode 7 were like, oh, Luke Skywalker, you know, he actually exists. I thought he was a myth. And, you know, we hear about how Luke is, you know, the most powerful Jedi, even more so than Darth Vader, but we haven't seen that yet. So I'm hoping we see the badass characteristics in Luke in Episode 8. And I think we're going to see it. I would love to see him in a really cool lightsaber fight. We'll just have to wait and see. But I truly think that we're going to see a side of Luke that we have never seen before. We're going to see a very powerful side of Luke, but we're also going to see a very wise side of Luke, which is going to be really, really fascinating to see. And the biggest problem people had, one of the biggest problems people had with Episode 7 was Captain Phasma. You know, she was played out as this Boba Fett kind of character. You know, the marketing for her character was all over the place. You know, she was extremely popular with all the toys and the comics. but in the film, she served absolutely no purpose whatsoever. She was probably the biggest botched thing in episode 7, so I think you're going to see more of her character be fleshed out in episode 8, and I think you're going to see some sort of confrontation between Finn and Captain Phasma, and they're going to have some sort of fight, or you're going to figure out what their actual relationship is in episode 7. And so I wouldn't count on her being too much like a Boba Fett character, because I think her character will be more fleshed out in episode 8 and 9. But at this point, it's a little early to say. And the thing about Lucasfilm, which is so brilliant, is they listen to fans' criticisms, and so they know. J.J. Abrams has even come out and said certain things he did right or wrong in episode 8, or I'm sorry, episode 7. And so I think now that, Lucasfilm knows the things that they got right and the things that they got wrong, they know where they're going to go with episode 8. And Rian Johnson, made sure he worked with J.J. Abrams while he was working on episode 7. So now Rian Johnson can pick up the mantle and, make episode 8 to be the best film that it can possibly be. And so I think where the series is headed, it's going to be great. I have complete trust in the filmmakers and Kathleen Kennedy, and it'll be really interesting to see how the new Star Wars universe shakes out. Anyway, guys, I think that's going to do it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed our very first podcast of Jedi Outpost. If you want to follow us on Twitter, we're at filmschooligans.com. We also have a YouTube channel, Film School Hooligans, and also visit our website, filmschoolhooligans.com. Anyway, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.